for being here. Who of you has developed web apps already? So there's a few, which is good, so I don't need to explain that much about what they are. We're concentrating on how to do things in a simple way and to understand what you're doing and the level of getting started, basically. And not so much on when you already know everything, because then you probably don't need an introduction talk anyhow. And we will take a look at the tools that Firefox has to work with web apps as well. I'm Cairo. This is Sayak, as you saw. So what is a web app? For those of you who already have done some, you probably know this already. I'll start off with, we have two types of web apps, basically, hosted and packaged ones. I'll come back to the packaged ones later. The hosted ones are just normal websites, basically. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, with the only addition of having a small app manifest that describes it. The packaged apps are the same thing, just packaged up in a zip file, and you download them locally to the device when you install them, which means it's easier to deal with offline capabilities because you already have all the files offline. For hosted apps, there's stuff to make them work offline as well, but that's a bit more complicated. So let's look at the main difference between a website and a web app. That's the app manifest. And on this projector, the whole manifest fits on the screen. That is nice. That's the manifest from my Lantia Maps application. This is exactly the manifest. I did not strip anything out. It's just a JSON file that describes what this app is and what it can do. So it has a name, it has a description that tells what the app is doing. Then the HTML file that is being called when the app is being launched, which just is index HTML here. The app cache path is just for offline capabilities of hosted apps. You can do that. You can work offline with stuff that refers to a web server. That's HTML5 app cache. If you want to learn more of that, there's a lot of resources out there, but it's a bit complicated. I won't go into detail on that. Then you have some permissions that the app needs. In this case, storage and geolocation. This is an app, as the description says, displays maps and records GPS tracks. So of course, if we want to record a GPS track, we probably want to know your location, so we need a permission for geolocation. And we need a permission for storage so that we can actually save those paths, those GPS tracks, and to store, to cache maps on disk so you have the maps offline the next time you go somewhere. And that's in the description, so that's the tile cache, the caching of the map. The description right now is there for reviewers, so once you upload the app to the marketplace, then it gets reviewed by our reviewer team, just like we have for add-ons as well. And right now, the description tells reviewers why you need this permission. In the future, we want to have some way to display that in the UI for users as well. So if you write this description, be aware that reviewers are determining if you're doing the right thing by reading the description. And keep in mind that it might be displayed to users at some point. We don't do that yet, but we have that in the plans for the future sometime. Then the app manifest also describes the developer. In this case, that's me, with a name and a URL to my homepage. And then it describes some icons. That's one thing that a web page by itself doesn't have, a list of icons in different sizes. So that's something we need in the app manifest, because of course you want to display an icon on the phone screen for this app. So the main reason why we have this is because once you install the app, we need to have some idea of what to display on an app screen and things like that. And that's what's in there. So that's the main difference that we have to web pages. And that's the whole secret behind it, basically. So you do a web page, you put up a manifest, and magically you have a web app. That's nice, right? But that's what Mozilla is all about. We're using web technologies to do all the stuff that others have created proprietary stuff for. So that's a nice thing. So I want to give you some idea of best practices for app development. Basically, that's not too much different than best practices for programming in general. And the most important thing with everything you program, and with web apps as well, is when writing the code, think of the fact that you probably need to have someone, yourself or someone else, maintain this thing later on. Maybe extend it, maybe fix bugs, whatever. So keep that in mind when writing the code, and it works magic. The most important thing there is, if you keep in mind that it needs to be maintained later on, someone not completely familiar with the code should be able to read it. That someone might even be you. I know for a fact that I've been looking at older code that I've written, and I'm not a big coder, but I've looked at older scripts and older stuff that I've written, and I thought, what was this doing exactly? So it's a good idea to consider yourself as someone unfamiliar with the code later on, because you don't remember everything that you did. So keep that in mind when writing stuff, and that makes it much easier. Use variable names that explain themselves, so that you know later on what this variable does. It's not very helpful to have f equals substring of x. You probably don't know anymore what that is a few years down the road, and someone else won't know it. Use descriptive variable names. Use comments with explanations for everything that's not obvious. If it's obvious by reading the code, a comment is useless. But if it's not obvious by looking at the code, and that's something where you need to use your judgment of what someone not familiar with this will see there. But use comments where you do things that are non-obvious. Especially if you use a few hours to find out what went wrong to fix a bug. It's usually a good idea to mark where you fix it with a comment of why you're doing this thing that you put in for fixing it, because that might not be obvious because you wrote it wrong in the first place, right? And keep in mind that's not only true for JavaScript in web apps. That's true for CSS and HTML as well. Having a CSS class somewhere in there where nobody knows what it's needed for is not really helpful. So use comments there as well, and also use grouping, especially in CSS. Use grouping things together that are logically fit together. It doesn't make too much sense to have things that belong together spread all across your files. Logical grouping can be done in different ways. Just make sure you have one logic and stick to it. So in the end, to summarize this, just think of how code should look if you want to contribute to a project and do a patch. What you expect there to find your way and to write a patch there. Exactly that's how you should write your own code. And with that, I also want to lose a word on libraries, because everyone doing website development, almost everyone uses some kind of JavaScript libraries. With web apps, be careful with those. When starting to learn things in general, it's good to know what every line that you write does. Usually with libraries, that's not necessarily the case. You import some black box and have that black box do something. When you want to learn how things work, it's better to do it yourself and not have it as beautiful and things like that, but you at least know what it's doing. Later on, when you understand everything, it might make sense to put a library in for some things, but start off without it, and start off with knowing what the code does. In web apps especially, especially when you use packaged apps that need some advanced permissions, if you need some advanced permissions that normal hosted apps, normal websites don't get, then you have stronger restrictions on what you can do in your code, especially through the CSP, what's the name? Content Security Policy, I think. You have restrictions on what you can do. Libraries were written for normal websites usually. And those libraries might not apply to those restrictions. So I read a thing last week or so where someone tried to use jQuery in an app and got some strange errors about something that was not allowed by CSP, and he did not write that code because that was jQuery code that violated that. So be careful with that. You might have stuff in there that doesn't actually work in web apps. Because libraries are, for example, using eval, which you are not allowed to use, and things like that. So be careful with those things. Size and efficiency is one topic there. You want web apps, especially on those constraint devices that we're using for Firefox OS right now. You want web apps to be small. Libraries can be large, and you might only use a tiny fraction of it. That's probably not the most efficient way to do things. If you just want something to be smoothly displayed, it might be better to use a CSS transition than a JavaScript library, because you're using only a very small portion of the library. And it's easier to patch your own code than a library usually, because you understand your own code, hopefully. You put in the comments and you made it understandable. You cannot be guaranteed that you can do that with the library, and once you run into updating libraries and you have done custom modifications, that's not nice. So if you need to fix something, it's better if you if it's your own code that you're fixing. And as a last thing, beware of licenses. The library license might not be compatible with the license of the stuff you want to do. So be careful to only use libraries if the licenses match what you want to do. So to summarize that, it's not bad to use libraries in general, but only use them if you really trust what they're doing. If you use a big enough portion of them, and if you really know what you are doing. Once you have understood everything that you're doing, it's easier to put it in. And that also means, ideally, you have the basic logic of your app working without the library. And then you can put it in to do some icing on the cake, basically, to do some nice effects. But make things work without it, and you probably are happier in the long run. I know there might be things that don't work without the library, but try to have it working without it if possible. And that said, when you are developing, there's a number of tools we have in Firefox that when you understand your code are good to use and to debug, and that's what Sayak will be talking about.
Thank you, Robert. So one of the tools that we have out there for building Firefox OS apps, web apps especially, is something that is known as the App Manager. I'm going to try something ridiculous for talks, that is try a live demo. So hopefully it works out good. So what is the app manager? Basically, the app manager is nothing but something that is added to Firefox itself nowadays, which allows you to add, debug, and basically do a lot of stuff with your code or with your web apps. So to start with, from Firefox 26 onwards, App Manager comes within Firefox itself. All that you need to do is go to Developer Tools and click on App Manager. So this is the home screen for the App Manager that you see over here. So it's basically divided into, it consists of three parts. One would be the device panel, which you can see over here. One being the apps panel, and the other part is something that is not yet visible that I'll be showing a bit later. That would be the toolboxes. So how does this work? The easiest way of adding an app to the app manager would be to add the manifest file for an app to the app manager. So we basically, as Robert just pointed out, we have two different types of apps. One is what we call hosted apps, and the other is something that we call packaged app. So I'll start with an example of an hosted app. So the example app manifest that Robert showed was that of his map application called Lantia. So I'll be just adding the remote path for his manifest, and I'll just click on the add button over here, and oh, okay. So that's the risk that we all take, right? Yeah, it is loading it, but I think there's an issue with the internet. So anyway, that should allow you to get the app. Okay, so that's something that's a risk that I took, and it did not pay off very well. The internet is not connected. So I'll just go ahead and show you how it works for packaged apps. It's as easy as clicking on this plus sign for packages. I have a demo app over here in my desktop. I'll just select the directory for it, and I'll click on open, and voila. This is basically an app. This is a packaged app that you see over here. As soon as I added the app, it's displayed in the app panel, and there are basically two particular sides to it. On one side, you can see the names of the apps that have been added, and on the other side you can see the description of the app itself. So in the description part, you can see the icon of the app, the details of the app, the path to the app, and also there is something really neat over here that is called the manifest editor. Now the manifest editor is something that already tells you that it's quite self-explanatory actually. It allows you to manifest your application's manifest. So you can directly change the description of your app, you can change the name of your app, or even the launch path or something. So if I want to, I can just click over here and I can change to something. And you see on the go you have changed the description for your app. Okay, so now I'll try to show one more thing, that is the simulator itself. I have the simulator running already, so if you click on update over here, your app is dynamically installed on your simulator, or even if you have a real device, you can directly connect it to your computer and it works just like the simulator. So if I want to debug this app, it's as simple as clicking the debug button and you have developer tools popping up. So this is the familiar developer tools that I guess almost most of you would recognize, whoever is a developer. So all web apps are nothing but HTML5 pages which have CSS, JavaScript and HTML. So if I can show you, if I use the conventional web inspector and I click on like any part of the page that is getting selected. So the background is red, that's why it's a bit difficult to understand, but it gets selected. If I click on this part or if I select this part, you see this little boundary coming over here, which I don't think is visible in the projector. Yeah. So, yep. So another good example would be if I do some direct modifications to the CSS itself. So I think I'll just try and change the background color to something like CCC. And I've dynamically changed the background of my app with the developer tools. This is similar to the web developer tools. You can directly save the CSS and it will be saved for your app. This is a very handy feature for any web developer out there or app developers. You can use the conventional debugger, profiler. You also have a scratch pad over here, and then you can also check for the console logs. Finally, I'll be showing you a small demo of a few more cool stuff. So if you can see, the home screen is also nothing but an HTML5 app. So if I click on debug for the home screen, okay. Yep. So okay. So okay, so I have some issues with Nightly over here.
I think
Yeah.
the similarity later is
Yeah. So thankfully I have a backup option as well. Okay. So I don't have much time now, so I'll just I'll try to do a quick demo and be done. So if I go to the style editor again, and if I want to show something more cool, I will. So I can just change the font size for this thing too. It increases this font size, so that just shows you that this is nothing but an HTML5. It's as easy as editing a web page, and everything that you do is directly reflected on the simulator, which can also be reproduced on the device itself. So these are some tools that you can really use for developing your own apps. And a final thing would be this little tool that we have over here. If I click on this screenshot, it shows me a direct screenshot of your app. So you don't need to again go with your camera and try to click a picture of your phone, or you don't need to manually take a device screenshot. You can directly use this, use the app to get the screenshots. And that was it with the app manager. So I'll leave the floor for any questions out there. Robert's good to go.
Yeah, you can go to the last slide on the other side, actually. And that's a surprise. Do you have any questions to what Sayak demoed or what I was talking about? Yep. So the question is to have it on there. Does the simulator support outputting sound in web apps?
So it's basically the same simulator that you're using as the previous versions. Hopefully, if a bug was filed for that and if it was fixed, then it should be up in the 1.3 version of the simulator. But the 1.2 version is the same as the previous simulator that you had over there. So.
Yeah, I think I actually never tried sound on the simulator, but surely if it doesn't work, make sure a bug is filed. Yeah, that guy is good to ask because he's working on developer tools. Any other questions?
Yes. You pause the mic, please.
Can you talk with a microphone? It's easier to understand for everyone.
When you run an app on the device, does every web app get its own process? Or is it just the same process for all web apps?
On the device, every app runs in its own process, yeah.
And on the simulator?
I'm actually not sure.
I'm not sure about it, but I think it's the same process as the simulator itself, or does it?
Yeah, I think the simulator is not multi-process yet, so that's one big difference. But on the device, you surely have different processes for every app, not for every web page inside the, even for every web page inside the browser. Only the browser app is not running in a separate process right now. I think that's about to be changed in the future, but that's not there yet. Anything else? Deploying web apps on different OSs and pitfalls. So you actually can run web apps pretty well on Firefox for Android or on any device that has Firefox for Android installed. And I think we even shipped in final releases of Firefox on desktop the support for running web apps natively. It's not really advertised well, but it should work, even though the marketplace does not right now allow installation on desktop, I think. But there's some workaround for doing that, even from the marketplace. I don't remember it exactly, but there's some documentation up on Mozilla Developer Network for that. And I think we're out of time. So thank you all for being here. It was nice to talk to you all.